and revising the topics that we've gone over on this side of the year in 2022. So in particular, we're going to be doing health and disease. I know this is a topic that can trip people up quite sometimes. And then we'll be going over the cardiovascular system as well as kidneys and excretion. Now, this is 3 months worth of content. In the same amount of time, we would have done one of these lessons. So we will not be expected to go over every single thing, okay? And this is why I want you guys to vote for the topics in these sections that you want to go over the most, okay? If we have extra time at the end, we'll go over some more topics. But if not, we want to prioritize those ones that you guys find really difficult. Now, in particular, in each of our sections, for health and disease, we have types of disease, we have human defense systems, we have vaccinations and the discovery of drugs. In the cardiovascular system, we have blood vessels, we have the heart, we have body temperature and blood pressure, and we have response to exercise. And then finally, in kidneys and excretion, we have excretion and water loss. So that's including things like, osmosis, how the kidneys work, etc. We'll delve more into the kidneys, as well as antidiuretic hormone, ADH, and finally, kidney failure. So we have potentially 12 topics to cover. And so what I want you guys to do on this slide is to vote for the topics you want to cover the most. So you have the option to pick your top 3 each, okay? So I'll give you guys some time to do that. And hopefully then we'll be able to see what you guys want to do. So I'll leave this up for a couple of minutes, also so you guys get used to how Slido interactions work if you haven't used them already. Let me get a pencil to write down all of these that you want to cover today. Nice. This is also an opportunity to see how many of you guys have joined us today. So for those that have logged on, welcome. Right, I'll give you guys 1 more minute, just in case there is a shift in what we will be going over today. And also to give other folks the opportunity to vote for what they want to go over. All right, okay. So that seems relatively static. So, by popular demand, the 3 main topics that we're going to be going over today will be the heart, human defense systems, and finally, antidiuretic hormone. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay, now, as we are going over these sections, we'll have a break after every section that we go over, and we'll also have dedicated time at the end of each section to go over any questions you put in our Q&A section, okay? So just make sure that if you guys do have questions about the topics that we're going over, or if you guys have questions in general that we might be able to cover, then please put them there. Right, thank you guys so much for voting. We will now start off with the heart. Okay, so let me scroll down to our heart content. As you can see, we have quite a few slides. Da-da-dun, da-da-dun. Right, so that's blood vessels. Nice. Right. So, as per popular demand, we will be going over the heart. Now, because this is a revision session and I want to make sure how well you guys are doing so far and what we need to spruce up on, there will of course be our famed quiz questions, okay? So, here we have our first quiz question. What I'd like you guys to do, type in a username that you want to be known by as you get on to our leaderboard. I'll give you guys some time to do that. And then when we're all ready, I'll put up the first question, count it down, and we'll get to it. So make sure that you guys type in the username and then we shall start. Okay, 30 more seconds, guys. Okay, right. So, for those of you who don't know, for the quiz, in order to climb up to our leaderboard, you must do two things. Our primary thing is first off to get the question correct, as per usual. Our second thing is to also answer as quickly as you can. Because this is a revision session and we want to make sure that you guys are getting the most out of it, I would prefer you guys to really prioritize getting the answer correct instead of trying to rush and click any kind of answer, all right? Take each option, consider it, and then we will go through it. So, first question in 3, 2, 1. Boom. How do we assess the heart's performance? Do we assess it with blood pressure, with cardiac output, with beats per second, or total peripheral resistance? How do we assess the heart's performance? Right. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, how do we assess the heart's performance? Let's see what you guys have said. Right. Okay, so 59% of you said beats per second, 24% said cardiac output, 14% said blood pressure, and 3% said total peripheral resistance. Now, what is the correct answer, you guys say? The correct answer is cardiac output, okay? So well done to the 24% of you that got that correct. So we'll go over more what cardiac output is, what exactly goes into figuring out cardiac output, etc. But sadly, the answer, even though 59% of you voted for it, is not beats per second, because if you think about it, when we're measuring our heart rate, you know, when you're counting the beats, etc., right? We do beats per minute, okay? So don't forget that, okay? Remember, when we are calculating our heart rate, we do beats per minute, okay? BPM, not beats per second, because a second isn't a very long amount of time, and it's very hard to count the number of beats in a singular second, okay? So, well done, folks, for voting on that, and thank you guys for voting. Now we're going to clear up what we mean by cardiac output, okay? So, as you guys already know, the heart's function is to pump blood all around and circulate it around the body, okay? The heart is a pump, it is a muscle, okay? Now, to assess this heart's performance, aka to assess how well it pumps blood around the body, we use this measure called cardiac output, okay? Now, this is what we use to calculate cardiac output. But before we get to that calculation, first things first, we're going to take a step back. What is cardiac output? Okay. Cardiac output essentially is the volume of blood that the heart pumps out every minute. Okay, essentially. Right? So I'm going to write this down so we all know. So volume, sorry, that's meant to be an E. Okay, so that's essentially what cardiac output is, the volume of blood pumped out per minute. Okay, now if you think about how this definition assesses the heart's performance, that's really important, right? Because in your body, you need a certain amount of blood pumped out every minute to make sure that all of your organs, okay, and every cell in your body gets the nutrients and the oxygen and the carbon dioxide it needs to carry out whatever functions it's doing, right? So the best way to assess the heart's performance is to assess how much blood the heart is pumping out every minute, okay? And that's what we mean by our cardiac output, the volume of blood pumped out per minute. Now, if someone walked up to you and was just like, what is your cardiac output? You guys would, of course, be like, I don't know how to work that out. I don't even know what kind of question that is, right? So cardiac output in and of itself is something that we work out, okay? So we have to take certain factors into play to work out what our cardiac output is, all right? So the two things we need to take into play are these two things, our heart rate and our stroke volume. We'll first start off with heart rate because it seems like we're relatively familiar with it, okay? Our heart rate is the number of times our heart beats per minute, okay? So remember, that was why that previous question was wrong, because instead of beats per second, it's beats per minute, okay? So I'm just going to say heartbeats per minute, okay? So as you're resting here, you can even count your heart rate, okay? And we're not going to do that now, but whenever you guys want, that's a nice thing to just check how you guys are doing. Normally, heart rate is between 60 to 80 beats per minute, okay? When it gets to like 100-ish, that's when you know your heart's beating really fast. Maybe something has scared you, maybe you're worried, maybe something else is going on in your body, all right? But your heart rate is the number of beats your heart does per minute, all right? Now, we go on to this next factor, to work out cardiac output, and this is the stroke volume. Now, what is the stroke volume? The stroke volume is the volume of blood pumped out per beat, okay? So I'll write that down. Volume of blood pumped out per, now let me put that in a different color so we don't get confused, per beat, okay? So that is what our stroke volume is, all right? So every time you feel that thump of your heart when you're checking your pulse, that is essentially when your heart is essentially pumping out that blood, okay? Right, and every beat that your heart has, a certain volume of blood is pumped out, okay? Now, this is relatively standardized for all humans, etc. So a lot of humans will have an average amount of blood that they pump out per beat, okay? So you can't necessarily measure the stroke volume, and they won't expect you to measure the stroke volume in your exams, don't worry. All they expect you to do is to at least know what the stroke volume means, okay? So, to conclude, we assess the heart's performance using cardiac output, okay? The volume of blood pumped out per minute. To do this, we need to figure out our heart rate, okay? The number of beats per minute, and we do that by measuring our pulse, okay? You can do it in your neck, you can do it in your wrist, etc. And we multiply our number of beats by our stroke volume, okay? And that is the volume of blood pumped out per beat, all right? Now, they might ask you a question in your exam where they're just like, I don't know, calculate the cardiac output or something. Now, they won't be so mean to not give you this equation, but it's also nice to know and see how these things work together, all right? So what they would normally do is, let me get green, okay? So say, for instance, if someone pumped out maybe, okay, so if we had a heart rate of 70, okay, so that's pretty average, that's pretty good, okay? Now, and in your question, they gave you a stroke volume of maybe, let's say, okay, maybe they gave you a stroke volume of around 70 mils, okay? And then they did 70 beats per minute, 70 mils, etc. Okay, so all they'd ask you to do is calculate the cardiac output. So what would you do? You just multiply these two together. 70 by 70, all right? And then together you would get 4,900 ml. Depending on the question, oh, sorry, hold on. Let me just rub that out so you guys can actually see the units, okay? So 70 times 70, if you do that quickly on your calculator, that's 4,900 ml per minute, okay? So you can see how the units fit in with our definitions, all right? Now, in a question, they might ask you to, I don't know, convert this to liters, okay? So all you really need to do is divide your 49,000 milliliters by 1,000. So then you have 4.9 liters per minute, okay? Roughly, okay? So this is really the most that they can ask you, the absolute most they can ask you about cardiac output. They could ask you about the definitions. They could ask you about how to work it out, but really they wouldn't be so unkind as to not give you this equation. And they also might ask you in a question to work out the cardiac output. But all you need to do is just plug in the values of your heart rate, multiply that by the stroke volume that they give you, and then you'll get your cardiac output. All right. Always pay attention to the units, because that is something that typically trips people up in calculation questions. All right. So I think I have labored our cardiac output enough, and I hope you guys understand now what cardiac output is. Remember, volume of blood pumped out per minute. You use your heart rate, your beats per minute, and your stroke volume, the volume of blood pumped out per beat, to work out your cardiac output. Nice. Next question. Fingers on buzzers, coming up in 3, 2, 1. What is systemic circulation? Blood flow from the heart to the rest of the body, then back to the heart. Blood flow from the heart to the lungs and back to the heart. Blood flow from the lungs to the heart and then to the body. Or blood flow from the bloody to the lungs and back to the heart. Sorry, there seemed to be a few tongue twisters there. I don't know what was going on. But from these 4 options, which best suits this term of systemic circulation? Okay, 30 more seconds, guys. What do we think systemic circulation is? Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, so what do we think systemic circulation is? Right, so 64% of you voted for blood flow from the heart to the rest of the body, then back to the heart, and 20% voted for blood flow from the heart to the lungs and back to the heart. Well, let's see. 64% of you are correct. Well done. Yes. So systemic circulation is essentially referring to that path that blood takes from the heart to the rest of the body and back to the heart. Okay, so we're going to delve more into what our circulation system has, especially in the context of where the heart fits into that. So well done, folks, for getting that answer. So we've established your heart is essentially a muscular pump. It's probably around the size of your fist, right? And it's divided into 2 halves, the right-hand side and the left-hand side, okay? So normally when we draw diagrams and when we see these in your exams, it will look like this. Now, I'm going to take a step here because this is something that trips folks up a lot. Okay, so we're going to clear this up now. Whenever you see a diagram of the heart, okay, even though we say right-hand side and left-hand side, it is not the right-hand side and left-hand side that we typically know and love, okay? When you look at the heart on your piece of paper, you have to look at your left-hand side and right-hand side as though you're looking at a person, okay? So the right and the left are inverted, okay? So this is the right-hand side of the heart, and this is the left-hand side of the heart. This tripped me up so much in GCSEs and confused me so much. And arguably, I probably lost a few marks because of this confusion if I didn't if I didn't address this. So we want to make sure that you guys really understand this. The right-hand side of the heart will be on the left of your page. The left-hand side of your heart will be on the right of your page. Just remember it as though you're looking at a person and you are going off their left and their right, okay? Every time we have a heart diagram in this section, I'll make sure to draw right and left so you guys are used to what we are looking at, okay? Because this is where people can lose silly marks. Now, it's divided into two sides, your right and your left. So your right is responsible for pumping your deoxygenated blood, right, from the rest of your body to the lungs, okay? So this will come from the rest of the body, right? And this blood will flow through our chambers and up and out into our lungs. All right. And now we have our left-hand side. So our left-hand side is responsible for pumping oxygenated blood around the body, okay? So different color, different side of the heart. So your oxygenated blood has come from your lungs back into the left-hand side of your heart. We'll go down into your ventricles and up, and then out again to the rest, of your body. All right. Now, one thing that you might be assessed on is this thing called single circulation systems and double circulation systems. Okay. So when we're talking about these two terms, they're really just talking about the path that your blood will flow through, okay? And it's really trying to address whether your deoxygenated blood and your oxygenated blood mix, okay? So in a single circulation system, all of your deoxygenated and oxygenated blood are mixed together and they all go in one direction, okay? This does not happen in humans, all right? This happens in a couple of animals, maybe like a frog or something like that, okay? Humans are the example of a double circulatory system, okay? And we can see that, so we can see this in the heart here. We know that our heart, it has a double circulatory system because in our heart, we have two separate sections, okay? We have the right-hand side of our heart and we have the left-hand side of our heart. Right-hand side has deoxygenated blood. The left-hand side has oxygenated blood. So we know that these two will not mix. Therefore, we have a double circulatory system. Once more, double circulatory system, our oxygenated blood and our deoxygenated blood do not mix, okay? So humans have a double circulatory system, all right? So these are our sides of our heart, our left-hand side and our right-hand side. And now we are going to have a exam question for you guys. So this is what it might look like when you draw a heart in your exam, okay? It might be a labeling thing. It might look a bit more complicated over here, but that's purely because of just the blood vessels that are coming out of the heart, okay? So don't get too bogged down by that. But regardless, you will still have your right-hand side on this side, and you will have your left-hand side on this side, okay? So that's what I want you guys to pay close attention to. So my quiz question to you guys is, we have this diagram of our human heart, and we have this section labeled A, okay? So your question is, what part of the heart is labeled A? All right, so this is coming up on Slido now. In 3, 2, 1. What part of the heart is labeled A? Out of our 4 options, which best suits that? So out of the 4 options that we have, what part of the heart is labeled A? I'll give you guys 30 more seconds, and then we will see our answer. Okay, I'll give you guys a tiny bit more time. And then I'll start our countdown. So what part of the heart do we think is labeled A? All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see what you guys have said. So what part of the heart is labeled A? Right, so 54% of you said the ventricle, 23% said the atrium. 54% of you correct. Yes, you are. Well done, folks. Yes, exactly. So that part labeled A is called the ventricle. Okay, so now what I'm going to take you through are the chambers of the heart, which you guys have so rightly identified one of them. So well done. Okay, so we've talked about our right-hand side of our heart carries deoxygenated blood. Our left-hand side carries oxygenated blood. And I'm going to do what I said I was going to do. Right, left. Now, each side consists of an atrium and a ventricle, okay? And these are 2 connected chambers. Right. So where you guys had correctly labeled A here, okay? So this is an example of a ventricle, right? In particular, this is the right ventricle. There's not too much to that particular name, which is great. Now, on this side, I'm sure you guys probably already know the name of this section. It is the left ventricle. All right. Now, we have our top 2 sections here. Okay, and this is called, each individually is an atrium. All right, so this is the right atrium. And this is the left atrium. Okay. Now, don't get too bogged down by these parts in the middle, because these are actually where you get our blood vessels starting. So this is not where we're talking about the heart, okay? So the 4 main chambers are already labeled on our screen here. So we have our right atrium going to our right ventricle, and we have our left atrium going to our left ventricle. If you guys ever get confused and you don't know what's on top and what's below, just remember it just follows the typical numberings of the alphabet, right? A comes before V, so your atrium is going to come before your ventricle, right? Simple as. So your atrium are going to be smaller. They're going to be the first parts that your blood meets, and they're going to be the smaller sections of your heart, okay? Then your ventricle will be the larger sections of your heart, all right? So let's delve a bit more into what we have planned for you guys. Let me just rub this off so you guys are able to see the writing. So your atria in particular, your left and right ones, these are going to be where your blood collects when it enters the heart, okay? This, I believe, is based off some form of Latin, okay? So if you ever go into a building, and they have a section called the atrium, that is essentially that first part of the building that you enter into, all right? That's why it's called the atrium. Same thing with the blood. The blood will enter the first part of the heart, which is called the atrium, okay? You guys might be looking at this and wondering, what is atria? I thought it was spelled atrium. Just remember, atria, because it comes from a Latin word, is just a plural version of atrium, okay? So this is just a plural of atrium. Right. So atria are where your blood collects when it enters the heart, and your ventricles are the parts of your heart which pump blood out of your heart. And this can either go to your lungs or it will go around your body, okay? So your right ventricle is going to pump blood. Oh, your right ventricle is going to pump blood to your lungs. Your left ventricle is going to pump blood to the rest of the body. All right? So these are our four main chambers, okay? Now, we're going to build a bit more, and now we're going to talk about what separates these chambers, all right? So, how do we separate these four chambers? We have our right and left atrium, and we have our right and left ventricle. Now, we have established previously that our heart is an example of a double circulatory system, aka our deoxygenated blood and our oxygenated blood do not mix, okay? They don't mix. So we have a double circulatory system. Now, how do they not mix? We know we have two sections of our heart, but what separates those two sections of our heart? What separates the right-hand side and the left-hand side? And that is what we call the septum, right? So let's put that in blue. So this part down here, this bulky part, right? That is our septum, all right? And that separates our right-hand side, which is full of deoxygenated blood, and our left-hand side, which is full of oxygenated blood. Now, this is really useful because it means that if they don't mix, our gas exchange and the efficiency of our circulatory system is much better, okay? So this is why our septum is important. It separates the right deoxygenated side from the left oxygenated side of the heart. Now, how do we separate our atria from our ventricles? Let's go into that. We have these valves, okay? They got some special names, okay? So, to separate our atria from our ventricles, we have two valves, and these valves have different names. And I only realized why they have different names because of the way that they look, okay? So, first off, we're going to start on the right-hand side, our tricuspid valve. Now, the easy way that I remember this is I use the quick phrase of try right, okay? I know that try has an R in it, so I know that's going to be the right-hand side of my heart, okay? So try right. That is the easy way that I use to remember what separates my right atrium from my right ventricle, all right? Now, this is really important to make sure that each part of the heart is filled up well and does its job, okay? So on our right-hand side, we have our tricuspid valve, all right? It's called tricuspid because it's actually made of three parts, right? That's why it's called tri, which is our prefix for three. Now, on our left, we have this thing called our bicuspid valve. And you guys can probably already see that our bicuspid is going to be made of two parts, okay, which is why it's called bicuspid. All right. So remember, try right, tricuspid, and you have our bicuspid here. Now, you guys might have heard our bicuspid named as something else. It has another name. This is AKA our mitral valve. Okay. Both names are valid. You can use either name for this valve. The reason why it has two different names is probably because somewhere down the line, someone named it something else, and then they added on another name. And for some reason, they didn't get rid of the first name because that's what happens in biology quite often. So it has two names. You can use either name. Both are correct. Okay. But regardless, on your right-hand side, you have tri-right or tricuspid valve. On your left-hand side, you have your bicuspid valve or your mitral valve. All right. So this is how you separate your atriums from your ventricles. Now, we're going to be talking about an additional point of separation, okay? Now, this is going to be separating our ventricles from our blood vessels. Because remember when I said at the beginning, when we were labeling the heart, that we didn't need to worry about these parts too much because these are the beginnings of blood vessels, all right? But our heart needs to make sure that it separates our blood vessels from the chambers of our heart so that it can do the job that it needs to do. So, how do we separate our ventricles from our blood vessels? We have these things called semi-lunar valves, okay? The reason why they're called semi-lunar valves is because when someone looked at them in the heart, it looked like half a moon, right? So that's why they're called semi-lunar valves, all right? So these are our valves that we need to remember. Tricuspid valve, tri-right. Bicuspid valve on our left-hand side, and our semi-lunar valves separate our ventricles from our blood vessels. Okay, now we've gone on to those and we've done our valves, we've done our chambers of the heart. Now we're going to be doing our blood vessels. This is what we're now coming on to, because remember, our semi-lunar valves separate our ventricles from our blood vessels. Right. Now, we do have a couple questions on that, but I thought I would put our vessels of the heart question later, okay? It's just so you guys have some time to familiarize yourself with vessels of the heart. So, we have four main vessels that we need to know about. These take blood into and out of our heart, okay? So, first things first, we have our Vena Cava. Now, this is probably taken from Latin because, as you guys can probably see, there is a lot of Latin involved in biology. So, Vena Cava, this part, vena, is probably Latin for vein, all right? I'm not too sure what the Latin cava means, but this can help us to figure out what kind of blood our vein or our blood vessel is carrying. Okay, so because our vena cava is a vein, this will be carrying deoxygenated blood, okay? And this will be carrying it from the body to the back of the heart. So let me label this again, right, left. Remember, our right has deoxygenated blood, our left has oxygenated blood. So our vena cava will take our deoxygenated blood from the rest of our body back into the heart. Now, where is it going to go when we go into the heart? It's going to go to the first part of our heart that it will enter, okay? And this is our right atrium, okay? Now, from our right atrium, where will it go? It has to go past these flaps here. Now, what is that called from our previous slide? I hope you guys are answering at home. But this is tri-right. You guessed it. This is our tricuspid valve. Okay? Tricuspid, tri-right. All right? So that deoxygenated blood, our vena cava has taken from our body back to our heart, will go through our tricuspid valve into our right ventricle. All right, so this is essentially the right hand side of the heart. Okay, so you have our vena cava will take our deoxygenated blood from the body back to the heart. All right, now next, I don't know why this was done in this particular order because I'd like to finish off the right hand side, but regardless. Okay, so we're going to pause on the right-hand side for now. And then we're going to talk about our left-hand side. So when we're talking about these two vessels, these are our two main vessels, okay? If anything happens to these, it's going to be bad news, especially about the one that we're going to talk about now, okay? So we know our vena cava carries deoxygenated blood from our body back to the heart. Now, we have this vessel here, our aorta, okay? This aorta, big vessel. It's a pretty big vessel, honestly. When you see it after it comes from the heart, it literally goes straight down the center of your body, right through your chest, right through your stomach, and then separates out when it gets around the level of your belly button, and then through your legs, it will go down into smaller and smaller arteries. All right. So big vessel, big vessel. So special name, aorta. All right. This is going to be carrying oxygenated blood. Okay, because the aorta is connected to the left-hand side of our heart, which carries oxygenated blood. All right. So what it's going to do is that it's going to take our oxygenated blood away from our left ventricle to the rest of our body, okay? Remember, it's an artery, and what do arteries carry? They carry oxygenated blood under high pressure, typically, all right? They carry blood under high pressure, and this artery is going to take blood away from the heart, all right? So these are our two big veins. Vena cava carries deoxygenated blood from the body back to the heart. Our aorta carries oxygenated blood from the heart, away from the heart to the rest of the body. Sorry. All right. So next two main blood vessels. We have our pulmonary artery. All right. So when we're talking about arteries and veins, we already know the distinctions and the differences between them, right? So arteries will be carrying blood at high pressure, and they have certain adaptations to help them do that. Veins will be carrying blood at low pressure. Now, veins typically carry deoxygenated blood. Arteries typically carry oxygenated blood. This artery that we're going to talk about is the only exception to this rule. All right. So we don't need to get bogged down by learning too many new exceptions. So even though this is an artery, this will still carry deoxygenated blood, okay? Because it takes it away from the right-hand side of our heart. Now remember, the right-hand side of our heart, right, left, carries deoxygenated blood, all right? So from what we've learned on our previous slide, we know that we have our vena cava, okay? This is going to take deoxygenated blood from our body to our heart, right? This is going to pass through into the right atrium. Then it's going to pass through this valve. Remember, tri-right, so tricuspid. All right. And then the blood's going to pass through that valve into our right ventricle. All right. And then finally, the blood is going to leave the right side of our heart to go to our lungs through our pulmonary artery. Okay. Pulmonary artery listed here. Now, even though this is an artery which carries blood away from the heart, it will carry deoxygenated blood because it's attached to the right-hand side. Now, we're going to be finishing up our left-hand side of our heart, because once our blood has gone to our lungs, once our deoxygenated blood has gone to our lungs, gas exchange will happen. That blood will now become oxygenated, right? And so where does the oxygenated blood go to? Is it the right-hand side? Is it the left-hand side? Exactly. It goes to the left-hand side of our heart. All right. So from our lungs, we will have our oxygenated blood return through our pulmonary vein. Okay, this is another exception to the rule, because typically we know that our veins typically carry deoxygenated blood, but this is the only vein that we need to know about that carries oxygenated blood. All right, so it will take that oxygenated blood from our lungs back into our heart. Okay, the action of the pulmonary vein. And then let's do our journey like we did on our right-hand side. So as it enters our heart, it will first go into our left atrium. All right. Then the blood will pass through our valves here, which is going to be our bicuspid. Right. Then as the blood goes through our bicuspid valve, it's going to end up in our left ventricle. All right. And then if we take what we learned from our previous slide and put this here, the blood from our left ventricle is going to go up through our aorta. Okay. And this is an artery that will take blood away from the heart, but in particular, an oxygenated blood, okay? And this will take blood away from the heart to the rest of the body, okay? So this is the typical journey of the blood in our heart. And these are our main labeled areas, okay? So now that I've taken you through that, we have a couple questions, and then that will be the end of our first part.